Hi, I'm Hannah Wallace and welcome to FinextraTV's Thought Leadership series. In this episode, we'll be looking at the ways in which people pay and transact today, how this is increasingly evolving as we enter extraordinary times, and what we can expect in 2021 from the world of payments. To guide us through the topic is Mark Barnett, President at Mastercard Europe. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Hannah.
No problem at all. So yes, the word unprecedented has been repeatedly used to describe the last few months, I think it's safe to say, and we've been covering a multitude of stories on the impact this year has had on certain areas of the industry. But homing in on payments and transactions, I'd like to hear from you what impact the events of 2020 have had on the way people pay and transact. So let's start there.
So before I answer directly that question, I'd like to start with two words because I think they're really important and they're going to run through as a bit of a theme, and they are inclusion and sustainability. Because although we've seen enormous changes, I think, and a terrible pandemic and a huge economic disruption, I think partly driven by payments, but by many other things, we can build back an economy and a society that is more sustainable and more inclusive than it was before. And that's kind of the starting place for our thinking at Mastercard when we think about the pandemic. So your question, what's happened? Well, obviously, as governments lock down around the world to protect citizens, massive changes in the way people spend. We saw contactless transactions in Europe rise to about 80% of all in-person transactions, and not just on cars, because of that 80%, about 20% were on devices, on mobile phones or watches or whatever it might be. Now, this hasn't happened overnight. We've been enabling open loop transit systems. I think there's about 260 cities in Europe where that you can now use a contactless open loop card to get around. And we launched contactless in 2004 in London. It went live in 2014 on the London Underground, and then it spread like a wildfire across the UK. So these things do take time. So that's one big change, the move away from cash towards contactless transactions. The second big thing is e-commerce. So we've seen a 40% year-on-year increase if you exclude the travel sector, which has obviously been very hard hit. And both those things really talk about one thing, which is we're becoming a sort of digital first world. And these are themes that were already out there, but they're accelerating. The uptake and usage of mobile banking apps has increased enormously. When I talk to my customers, my mother has just started using a mobile banking app and loves it. So it's really quite remarkable how those things have changed. I think also the likelihood is a lot of that change will stay with us. Once you've made your first online grocery shop, you're probably going to do it for a second time. Once you've tapped for a low value transaction, you're probably going to do it for in future. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of the trends we see, and some of the survey data we've seen shows that 7 out of 10 people think they'll use a lot less cash, and 50% of people will go completely cashless post pandemic, which is really quite extraordinary figures. It might not be as sharp a change as that, but it's certainly very different.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you certainly set the scene for us there. So as we look to the future then, the crystal ball question, as it were, and navigate the coming months, how do you see the way people paying continuing to evolve further down the line then?
Well, I guess the obvious answer is it's going to be more digital. But look, there's lots of different ways to pay digitally. And that's why we think at Mastercard we're the only truly multi-rail payments tech company. We have invested and built assets like account-to-account payments in the UK with our acquisition of VocalLink. We're building the world's first real-time cross-border multi-currency clearing system in the Nordics with P27. We've had regulatory approval for an acquisition also in the Nordics of Nets Corporate Services. And all these things enable us to offer our customers, whether our customers be big multinational banks, local banks, fintechs, governments, retailers, the ability to offer their customers a real choice in the way that they pay. A couple of good examples, open banking. We just launched with Tesco in the UK an open banking solution. Pay by account, again, that's something that we're beginning to scale in a couple of markets, which enables you to use your mobile banking app for shopping. Mm-hmm. Both those things, I know it's something of a cliche to say if you don't disrupt yourself, somebody else will. But both those things compete with debit type products. But we're very happy to do that because we know the future's changing. We want to be able to offer people the choice, and we want to offer our customers the ability to build great user experiences for their end customers, whether they be people or retailers and merchants.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you mentioned P27 there, because before the pandemic we were picking up momentum with P27, so I'd like to hear a bit more about where we are with that initiative now.
Well, I mean, you know, it's a major infrastructure build, so it's on track. It's, you know, it'll take a number of years until all the various layers of services have been added on top, but it does give us fantastic insight to the world of account-to-account payments. You know, in the Nordics, they have VIPs and Swish and mobile pay, and these have 80–90% adoption by the population, usually to make P2P payments and increasingly P2M payments, but all happening on account-to-account rails. And we just think it's really important to be in that mix and learning from that, because we don't intend to own or build infrastructure for account-to-account payments all over Europe, or indeed all over the world. We will in some places. But what we want to do is build applications like Pay by Account and services like the anti-money mules service that the UK banks now operate on top of those account-to-account rails. So I would say our journey into new payment flows is progressing really well, actually.
Brilliant. All right, so let's talk a bit more about 2021 then, and a bit about what Mastercard is doing in this space. What are some of the key and core priorities even Mastercard are focusing on, and what are some of the interesting things you're doing in this space?
So look, I want to come back to the inclusion and sustainability thing, because it's kind of obvious that digital is very important for us, and new payment flows and account-to-account and different types of payment, but I've already talked about that. A few years ago, we launched an initiative along with our partners to try and financially include 500 million people around the world. And that has been achieved, working with over 200 partners in 80 different countries. In Europe, that's mainly been working with governments to bring basic bank accounts or prepaid type products to people who otherwise wouldn't have been part of the digital payments world. We've sort of doubled down on that now, and are aiming for 1 billion people by 2025. Obviously, we can't do it by ourselves. It's with the network and all the players that we work with. Mm-hmm. But that inclusion, or the need for that inclusion, has been made even more stark by this pandemic, and you know, the digital divide that exists as a result of it. So we think that's really important. On the sustainability front, I mean, you might have seen recently we announced the expansion of our Priceless Planet partnership. Mm-hmm. Quite to say that. Mm-hmm. And we've got over 30 partners. They're some of the large banks, some of the large corporates, some of them are government entities, some of them are fintechs, but we've got over 30 partners now, and what we're trying to do is use our network effect because we do interact with lots of companies to bring them into a partnership to help plant 100 million trees by 2025. And we don't pretend to be experts on planting trees. We have a panel of climate science experts, and we work with partners who know which trees and where they should go. But what we try to do is three things. The first is that network effect. We get lots of organizations, so we can reach lots of people through those organizations into the coalition. The second is enable consumers to understand what their carbon footprint is. We have a partnership with a company called Deconomy in the Nordics, and Deconomy has an index, and effectively, with our technology combined with theirs, a consumer can look in their mobile banking app at the transaction they just made, and it can tell them what the carbon footprint was of that transaction. And then thirdly, if you want people to offset that, then we can allow them to donate via our donation platform, and that could be planting trees, or it could be other carbon neutral type activities. So a couple of things, those are real priorities for us. Obviously, digital payments, new payment flows, B2B, open banking, all the things you'd expect me to say. But I do want to underscore it with that inclusion and sustainability message, because we are very serious about it.
Sure. Well, I hear you loud and clear, inclusion and sustainability, and I think it's safe to say watch this space. But today we'll leave it there, Mark. Thank you so much for calling in and sharing your insights, and looking forward to watching this space.
Great stuff. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again.